Abolition, a discussion featuring founders of the Returning Artists Guild, Aimee Wissman, I'll just have you do a little wave, and Kamisha Thomas, artist Kirsta Niemie Benedetti, sorry Kirsta, organizer Safear Ness, and portrait participant Jess Bain. Please help me welcome our panelists.
Excuse me. If you want to go with the shirt off.
Thanks so much for coming, guys. Hopefully you all had an opportunity to see the work. There's a lot to take in, and we know that it can be emotional, but it also will really add to our conversation tonight if everyone has an idea of what we do and where we come from. So we will, I think for now, we do want to have it be a discussion for sure. We're all going to share about how our art and the work we do contribute to abolition, and talk about some more details about what we do, but then we do want to open it up for questions. So I think keep that in mind. Sophia, do you want to start for us?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, cool. What's up, y'all? I'm Safear. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a formerly incarcerated abolitionist organizer from Philly. I spent 12 and a half years in prison in Pennsylvania, where we did a variety of inside-outside political education projects and programs, including starting a print publication called In the Belly, which you might have seen over there. This publication was started in 2020 in Pennsylvania State Prison during COVID. While prisons were on lockdown, we created a publication for incarcerated people to dialogue, to talk, and communicate and organize around abolition. And yeah, I came home February 2023, and since I've been home, we've been continuing these projects such as In the Belly, In the Mix, Prisoner Podcast, and a host of other things.
Okay, so I'm Kamisha Thomas. I'm a co-founder of the Returning Artists Guild, which is on its way to becoming a nonprofit organization. We represent or exhibit the work of currently and formerly incarcerated artists. We also support them in any way we can, be that financially or with professional development, things of that nature. I am primarily a filmmaker, but I do paint a little bit. And something that radicalized me or got me into prison abolition as far as my artwork is concerned is just being able to control your own narrative, and the importance of that is something that I strive to make clear in my artwork and in the vision. So it's abolition is not just about ending prisons, it's also about creating other systems in the place of prisons that are holistic and that benefit everyone, because we know that prisons don't work. So that's me.
I'm going to answer that second part of the question, but I do want to say, please check out the work in the galleries, in the hallways upstairs and downstairs, and in the stairwell over there. So like Kamisha said, we're the co-founders of the Returning Artists Guild. We represent loosely around 40 artists, mostly in the state of Ohio, both inside and outside prisons. And we support their creative practice as well as their professional development through exhibitions and sales, and then also, like Kamisha was saying, the holistic support through the reentry process. We can't really holistically support people who are inside because of all of the barriers to that work. And we are abolitionists. It informs our work and our practice. As formerly incarcerated people, we've had to make a lot of choices about how to engage or not engage the system. and where we may or may not be welcome to engage the system. So kind of leave it at that. I'm a visual artist. I have work in the show. If you have questions about that, those are the ones I like to answer.
I'm Jessica. I just got out of prison December 6th of 24. I'm actually still at the Sober Living. I was a big part of Kirsta's group. Our work is out there. Being in that group just really opened my eyes to just like the support that you don't realize like that you have outside of there being inside of there, you know? She came with and met with us monthly, weekly for a while and just showed us that she cared and was there for us when we didn't think anybody else would be. And I'm still working with her, as you can see, to this day. So I'm just trying to work on what I can to better myself after I leave the halfway house.
Yeah, we're super proud. I'm Kirsta, and so the portraits that you see that are the large scale ones of the three-dimensional objects in the hallway are my work, as well as there's more upstairs. And I started a group that merges our portraiture and storytelling. As a portrait artist, I have found the power of a portrait as a way of elevating people and highlighting the amazingness of a person. And so because of that inherent power, I've chosen to work with people that need to be highlighted and who have oftentimes been marginalized or forgotten. So I started a group with Jess and 14 other women at Ohio Reformatory for Women in, was it 2023, June of 23. And I've gotten to go weekly, and the program merges kind of some art therapy projects that help the women focus on their personal strengths and what they contribute into their community. And then I was similar to what Kamisha had said about, you know, incarceration. It takes away a lot of the power to tell your own story and to communicate who you are as a person. Instead, there's a lot more labels put on you. And so I wanted the project to kind of deconstruct that and give back as much agency to the women about their own story and how they're perceived to the community.
So I think our next, thank you. I think our next thing to talk about, Kamisha kind of already started, but like what brought you to the work of abolition, and if you could maybe say a little bit about what abolition means to you, knowing that there's not like a perfect definition.
Sure, want me to start?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, to me, abolition is about presence and not absence. It's about thinking, imagining what would a world without prisons look like, and then try to build that. But that didn't come out of nowhere, where I didn't like always believe that. I think it came first and foremost out of me going to prison at 18 years old, essentially a child, going upstate. And yeah, just being surrounded by a lot of people from my neighborhood, from my city, people that were in very, in similar, you know, economic situations as mine, you know, people, mostly majority Black folks though, right? Like sitting in these situations and thinking, well, damn, like all of these people in here, and it's not actually making us any safer, right? Like, and we started thinking about this and like contemplating on all of these prisons. There's like over 20 prisons in Pennsylvania. I don't know how many exactly are in Ohio right
33.
now. 33, yeah, there's a lot. All of these prisons, all of these police in our neighborhood, and we started asking the question, do you think that police and prison has made your neighborhood any safer? Like, has it made your neighborhood any safer where we're from? Where we're from, cops everywhere, on every corner, and it's still not safe. Still not safe there. So then we started thinking, okay, well, what would it take to make us safe? What does it actually take? And people mentioned jobs, healthcare, drug and mental health treatment, mentorship, access to food, access to housing, you know, like the basics of life and survival. And then, you know, when you go down that path a little further, and you're like, okay, well, police and prison aren't actually keeping us safe, and yet there's millions of people locked up in this country, then what is this what is this actually for? What is this institution doing? What is happening here? And I think, yeah, just on a very just communal level of where we were at, we just wanted to start relating to each other differently, without punishment, without disposability. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna piggyback off of the last big point that you made, which was that, it was jobs, housing, food. Those were the things that people expressed that they needed in order to feel safer. And I say this all the time, people whose needs are being met do not commit crimes. It's a very simple, I don't know why people don't understand that, but if a person's needs are being met, they're not committing a crime. They're not robbing the bank so that they can pay the bills. It's just that simple. And I think it's important, like you said, to imagine the world without prisons or jails, because we know that the prisons and jails are not making us safer. We know police are not making us safer. They have to react. They have to know that something bad has happened before they can do anything. And if they are suspect whatever, like it's biased 90% of the time, and that's too big of a percentage. So we need to do things that encourage mutual aid and care for one another and community. And that's what abolition is to me. It's not just ending mass incarceration, which is ridiculous, but it's also just caring for people in your community. If you're hungry and I got it, I'm gonna feed you. You know what I mean? That's just the way, in my opinion, the way the world should be.
You all said some good stuff. What else is left? I think, like Safear, abolition started for me the moment I became incarcerated myself. One, realizing the big lie about who's in prison and why they're there. It's not serial killers. It's not the people that you want to be brought to justice a lot of the time. And there's so much disparity in the way that people are sentenced for the same thing. And there's so much harm that is caused by the experience of incarceration that I found, at first I was sorry, and then I was no longer sorry. And that was a moment for me. And then also, intersectional feminism and reading was super important for me, and understanding that, my liberation is bound up in everyone else's, full stop. Was really important, and I think just that lived experience of witnessing injustice and harm and wanting to be able to be allowed to dream about a world that handles even the harm that I've caused differently, right? My daughter was a year old when I went to prison, and so the harm of my absence is something that's still playing out in my life now. So I think there's just we need to take a radical look at what we're doing to other human beings. And then also when I got out of prison, I started kind of doing some advocacy stuff around the art space right before we founded RAG. And I went out to California for this thing called California Lawyers for the Arts. And they throw a big conference every year because California has arts programming for prisons as a line item in their state budget. And they're, along with New York, I believe the only ones that do that. And so what I saw was wow, these California prisons have everything. They got studios and, for music and art and this and that, all these economic opportunities, etc. But there was a feeling about making a better prison versus ending prisons. That was really hard for me to reconcile. On the one hand, I wanted to go back in and start doing art therapy again or whatever. On the other hand, I felt that I don't think it's my job to make these places more humane, although that is important. I feel more strongly that reform is not gonna cut it. It really needs to be abolition. We really have to find a new solution, and making prisons more habitable for people, like obviously that would be great. I have so many people inside that I love and care about. On the other hand, like I don't want better prisons to just be another way that we incarcerate people for super long periods of time because now it's humane or now there's resources or whatever. So I think those, like all of those things is what made me start to think about what does it look like to work around this system? What does it look like to use all the free will that I have as a formerly incarcerated person to fuck them over, you know, to fight back, to ignore their rules, to support people that I care about and see them thrive. And that's what abolition is about, I think, for me.
Okay.
Let's see, abolition, when they had asked me a week ago what abolition meant to me, I was like, I have no idea. What do you guys think it means to you? Because like I said, I'm freshly out. I just got out in December. And to me, I do believe, I mean, this might be a little different than what you guys believe. I do believe that we do need a justice system. Obviously, like kind of what you said, that it's not all serial killers and, you know, it's not that serious. Most of us are drug addicts, let's be honest. That's most of the prison system today. And it's still a work in progress for me of like how exactly I feel about abolition. But I do know that while I was incarcerated, the prison didn't do anything for me. What I did in prison is who made me who I am today. There were so many opportunities. You know, I could have laid on my bunk every single day and did nothing. But, you know, I chose to get up and say, hey, what about this group? Hey, why don't we start this, you know? And like Kirsta's group, when it came in, I was like, please sign me up. You know, anything to get me out of that mindset of just, oh, I'm in prison, I feel sorry for myself. You know, it's not what it's about. You know, accepting responsibility for what had happened and moving forward and doing everything I can to better myself. So yeah.
That's awesome. Good.
Yeah, I don't have a history of incarceration, so my route has been a little bit different. I have a background in community development, and so I have a training, I have an art degree, and then I've always worked within community development and social work, so I've kept those parallel and wanted to utilize my art for some kind of community change. And I've studied for a long time what personal change, how that happens best, and what I found is usually it is most lasting when someone has a connection to a personal story with someone, more than if they read a statistic or something. So that's kind of honed me in using my artwork to create these personal connections. Particularly with incarceration, I have always cared deeply about the population and just generally vulnerable people. And the more that I worked within vulnerable communities and learned about poverty and systems in this country, there was this clear route of, you know, poverty to prison pipeline. And so it felt very important that if I'm claiming to want to use my art as a way to amplify and honor and dignify people who have had so much stripped from them, then I need to be in this space of incarceration. What I wasn't prepared for was the deep relationships that I met there. And I mean, I knew that there would be a whole variety of people inside as there is outside, you know, for sure. But the way that it changed my life to build personal connection, and then what's cool is that I get to, when I make the work, my love for these women pours out, and so it becomes a very natural connection that way, instead of I'm this observer that's trying to make a point that has nothing to do with me. But yeah, I think in particular, wanting to create dialogues and be engaging, and I found that, you know, art is something that goes beyond, it kind of takes a back door, and so it's very invitational, and it draws people in, and that for me has been a key element in wanting to work within this system. I do go into the prison, so I can't hold a lot of, the similar lines that the other advocates can, because I have to work within a lot of the confines. But what has been exciting is I have pushed a lot of boundaries and just been like, all right, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do a Chinese buffet? Can I, and I was the warden, and if you all see the pieces, they're large, they're like 4 feet, they're heavy, they've got stuff in them, they're really weird to explain, and every time, and the warden let me bring these pieces in every time I finished them. And so I was the crazy art lady who would have this little wagon that I would push the stuff through the yard. And but what was really amazing is to see when the staff would see these portraits of these women that they knew for years and years and years, it would be, they would check it at the gate, and they would be like, they'd kind of do this double take and be like, that's Heather. I've known Heather for 30 years. Like, oh. And it would, the change of how they perceived her was visible. And so it was like, okay, I'm on the right track. And then we were able to have a full art exhibition in the prison, which was really cool, and people got to bring family and friends, and over 100 public members came in and see it, and then, it was just an interesting time to engage. The art is so powerful, and I think it would be great if we could all, continue to go and talk about how our art in particular impacts how you use it for abolition. Safear, would you want to start us again?
How we use it for abolition? Yeah. So for me, I'm a writer. I'm not an artist per se, but I do have a lot of relationships with artists that are currently incarcerated in prison. And yeah, that's, even with our podcast, I think that's one of the channels that we use to kind of amplify the voices, the message, the work of currently incarcerated people. So I think for me, how I kind of look at myself right now is just kind of like a facilitator for all of these amazing people that I left behind in prison. It's came up again a couple of times where people have said, like, prison is full of normal people, right? It's not the super predator myth. Excuse me. It's not the super predator myth. It's not full of serial killers and the likes of this. It's a microcosm of society, and what that means is just like there's all different types of people out here in the world, there's all different types of people in prison from every political shade, every race, belief, spirit, like you will find it across the board. And in prison, there's some really amazing people, some real community builders, people that I wish were out here to be change makers. So I feel like most of what I do is just trying to kind of uplift them.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And I just want to say, Kirsta, that you going in, and like Aimee and I, we don't go in, but you going in, that's excellent, because we need more people like you to go in to show the women or the men, humanity, and give them an opportunity to express themselves creatively, because that's always being stifled. Mm-hmm. It's always being stifled, especially in prison. You're not allowed to be an individual or anything. They want everybody looking the same, smelling the same, taking the same shit. You know what I mean? That's what they want. But as far as my artwork in abolition, because I'm a storyteller, I use, that skill to just amplify the voices of the people who have been marginalized, and that it carries over into my work with the RAG, because with what Aimee and I do with the support for the artists that we give, is kind of like case management. And so I have to first listen to this person's story and determine how we can best, help them or serve them. And then I can, start to put the pieces together in order to come up with a plan to help them. I'm a healer, I'm an empath, I'm, in that we need more of that just all together, but also it's important in abolition because you have to be empathetic and care about someone other than yourself in order to be able to make like an effective change.
Man, sometimes I'm listening too good and I really not to tell me what you're gonna say. How I use art for abolition, my art. Yeah, so.
Do you want to describe your art a little bit more?
Yeah, I could do that. I'm mostly a painter, but I've been making more like assemblages, so something similar to a sculpture, but a lot more found objects, and I just make little parts of it. And I also have an installation in the hallway downstairs that's pretty cool, I think. But I think for me, you know, art making is an act of resistance, period. Just, it is. And I'm a self-taught artist, so I started making art while I was incarcerated, mostly for, you know, my kid, and then also to have a moment of color, or to have a moment of release, or a moment of control. And that kind of led me to become pretty obsessed with colors and surfaces and ways of abstracting my thoughts and feelings, and also ways of communicating, sometimes subversively, where with a little sneaky kind of effect. And I mean, currently I still, you know, teach classes. I work with a lot of folks who are directly impacted through the RAG and then partner organizations. I do some public art here and there. I think for me as an artist, it's about developing a language around my experience with the carceral system. So pretty obsessed with what I consider to be carceral materials, like things that are from the prison, things that you know, I had during my time or that people are bringing home to me, and also the interconnection between the carceral landscape and schools, hospitals, jails, roads. Like, they're all kind of built out of the same materials. And as a quick anecdote, I think it kind of relates. When I was incarcerated, I got a ticket for meditating because I had my shoes off. The ticket was a sun tanning ticket. When I got heard on the ticket in front of the sergeant, the rule infraction was destruction of state property. Because if I got sunburned, they did not want to have to pay for whatever packet of ibuprofen they were going to give me, right? So that also is like another moment, I think, that sort of radicalized me and also super informs my art. Like, what is the difference between me and public space or public property? What is the difference between my body and that bridge? Is something that I'm still trying to like suss out.
Because at one point you were state property.
Exactly. And then I think now looking around and recognizing all of this other state property, I sort of feel like maybe I could have a little piece of that or do something with that. They're not using it. I don't know if that'll hold up in court, but that'd be my intention, I suppose, with public art. Yeah, I think also just like staying in community with the people that are impacted or tangentially impacted, because that's another important part of this whole thing, is like abolition is about using your skills and your talents and your time in the things that are in front of you. Like, we can all work on building better communities, and that's an act of abolition. You don't have to like go into the prisons or talk to incarcerated people every day. Like, you can do the work that's in front of you, and that counts. And so for me, that just happens to be artwork.
Okay, well, I am not an artist at all, so.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. I just want to share a little bit about what we did in group. I remember how you were just saying something about we wanted us to all be, like, we were just a number. We were nothing else. We had to dress the same, all that. Kirsta had us do this project one time where we had to, I think it was color or write our numbers out. Yeah, we had to write our numbers out and then just kind of like decorate it, and then she would like put it all nice. She was like, now cut it up. And we were like, it looks so great. Why do we have to cut it up? So once we cut it all up, she's like, now put it all over the paper. And then once I seen it, it felt good to like finally just like have that release. Like, she wanted us to see that we're just not a number, that we are people, and that, you know, and that day I did find out I was a little bit of an artist because I actually really liked that project.
You did a great job.
Yeah, and that's one that just really stuck out to me. And she just made sure to always focus on us each individually, and she got to know one of us and like what we all, like what drove us, what motivated us, what just made us want to be who we are today. And there were so many art projects that we did, but I remember there's girls that still message me today. We have this like getting out app, and I still talk to some of the girls who are in the group, and you know, they were like, do you know when she's coming back in? And just when we would see her come through, we'd all be so excited, you know, just knowing that there's somebody on the outside that does care about us and does want to get to know us and just help us get through life, you know. So thank you for that.
Do you want to talk about your piece in particular and what your objects?
Oh yeah, okay, so I don't know if you guys have seen it. My piece out there was the one that has the grass and the daisies on it. I picked the daisies because they're just my mom's favorite flower. She's in the audience, so. And you know, she just has always been a big part of my life, through my addiction, through everything. She's just always been there for me. And then also through incarceration, I was on the yard crew, and I had found out that I absolutely love to cut grass, do anything outside. You know, growing up, Dad would always be like, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. I was like, I don't want to pull weeds, but you know, once I got to prison, it was like, wow, I actually really do enjoy this, and to see the work you do afterwards, it was like, wow, I did that, you know. So that's why I did. I know I felt like mine was kind of like boring. Because girls were doing diamonds and this, and I'm like, mine's grass and daisies.
Yeah,
but you know, it just represents me and who I am. But yeah, that's really it.
Yeah. I'll explain a little bit more about the concept behind the project too. But from the baseline of abolition, I think what a lot has been said is the emphasis that when you're talking about prison and any kind of incarceration, you are talking about people and lives. And I think because it's such a hot topic and it's been controversial and it's been discussed, and there's so many, the vastness of it gets really abstract. And so for me, what I've seen my role in this is bringing it back down to an individual person and reminding people that these are people. And part of what I did with that was with the portraits, I wanted these women to be seen as themselves first, and then for people to find out about incarceration. And so conceptually stepping back from that, well, and also when thinking about portraiture and incarceration, there's an interesting relationship, because you've got like mugshots and you've got IDs, and then you also have, for most people, pictures of themselves at their own trial, and they had no say over how they were depicted and the story that they told in the media. And so when, you know, taking that into consideration, I wanted to do as much as I could to give back, like I said, the agency and the ability for the women to be able to depict who they want to be. So I wanted to physically remove the symbol of incarceration. That would be something that people would see first, and so that could be something where that's where a viewer would stop. And so I cut out from this wood panel the state issued prison uniform, and I didn't want to just paint a new shirt. I didn't want to say, you know, what's your dream outfit and I'll paint it on you. I wanted there to be a hole. I wanted there to be a removal, that people would know there's something missing here, and I wanted to be able to replace it with something unexpected. And so I worked with each woman, and they told me objects that represented themselves better than their incarceration or their crime ever did. And so what you see first is who this woman really is, and then you can get to know her and the complexities that, you know, that might have been part of her incarceration. I also am really fascinated by personal identity formation and working with incarcerated women. I think women's identities can be really complex anyways, because a lot of times we refer our identity based on our role in other people's lives. And so then when coming at the intersection of incarceration, it gets even more complex. And something that was really fascinating that I wasn't expecting, but have been really intrigued by and so motivated to continue doing this work is for working with these women, especially with some of them have been incarcerated for over 20, 30 years. And some of them, most of those people have been incarcerated since they were between 17 to 19. So talk about identity formation, you know, a lot of their identity has been centered solely on incarceration. And I mean, my goal was like, I want them to feel authentically represented and to feel honored. But other than that, I didn't have any expectations really. But what was really amazing is when women were seeing themselves externally represented and in these bright, vivid colors, and it's recognizable, but it's not photorealistic. Like it's kind of more of this like essential expression. For many of the women, they expressed seeing a change of like, I never knew I could be proud of myself. I never knew I could be beautiful. And being a part of even just a small step towards that personal realization of the value in themselves of that shift of identity from I am someone who did wrong to I am a complex human being that has a lot of good, that has a complex, you know, past maybe. So that's been really amazing. And one of the key things, and I don't want to misquote her, so I have read a lot of this abolitionist Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and the title of my show comes from a quote from her, and she said, "Where life is precious, life is precious. It's places where different parts of society work together to lift up quality of life." And that's similar to what Kamisha was saying is, you know, when life is seen as valuable and precious, then it's everybody benefiting everybody. And in places where inequality is deepest, the use of punishments and prisons is greatest. And so I think working with these women where most of them were serving extended sentences and a couple of them life without parole, I wanted to use that play of words when I heard Ruth talk and say those things, you know, life is precious. It's like, yes, these lives are precious. Whatever they did, their lives are still precious, and there is still so much that they contribute. And so I see for myself that highlighting those elements to be, and being, you know, someone that can stand in the middle, someone that I can bridge these gaps between the inside and the outside, and I can help the women remember they're not forgotten, and I can also be an easily accessible point to this population that is removed and restricted so that viewers can come in and engage and hear stories. One thing to mention, well, actually two things. The portraits are, you know, really interesting in themselves. There is a booklet that where the women were able to write what their objects mean to them and a little bit more about themselves. And so there are some available at the main desk downstairs, and then I think there might be a few that you can use when you walk around and see the pieces. But also in the lobby area, right in the beginning, there's a table with all these black books, and a big part of trying to create that connection is the storytelling aspect. And so I wanted to ask the women questions that would solicit stories from a different perspective that has nothing to do with their incarceration. So I asked things like, what does happiness smell like to you? And so Jess had said, fresh cut grass is one of those, you know. And you know, when have you felt most beautiful? And when has somebody been extravagantly kind to you? And so those, and then so I walked through, and every week we would do a couple different questions and then share stories. So it was really connecting as a group. But then I wanted everybody on the outside to be able to interact with these intimate stories. So you see their handwriting. They each wrote their stories in their books, and they're all able to be viewed. Sadly, they are a little more delicate than I planned. I didn't know that the pages were perforated, so sorry if they're delicate, but you'll be able to see the family photos they paste, and just the ways that they've chosen to use markers and creativity. And so that's something that's not as bold and sexy as the portraits maybe, but in my mind, it's some of the more impactful work. So if you have time, definitely engage with those. And then there's a piece upstairs that I wanted to press into a little more interactive artwork and engagement. And so I focused on things that have impacted me most when I am going into prison and connecting with these women. And the times that I was able to really pinpoint that was whenever we talked about things that the women miss because of being incarcerated. And so I chose to do a piece that highlights the top thing that every woman in my group misses. And so those are cut out of these papers that you can read. But the second part of the engagement was I wanted to give people on the outside an opportunity to do something in honor of these women as a way to connect back and remind the women that they're valuable and that they're not forgotten. And so each woman came up with an activity that us on the outside can do for them in honor of them. And so you can grab a card and it has one of the women's names on them and then their what they have asked you to do. And then on the back, there's a QR code that links to a form where you can just share who you honored, what you did, and kind of how it impacted you. And then I share all of those back with the women. And it's been really amazing to see the power of art to connect people and to, just make the line between us very, very thin, because that is the truth.
Definitely. I want to take a moment to talk to the audience real quick and find out if we have any artists in here and if we have anybody that considers themselves an abolitionist in here. Don't all speak at once. Raise your hand if you consider yourself an artist or an abolitionist. Okay, got some artists back there. Okay, a bunch of people raised their hand when I said abolitionist. Check y'all out. That's what's up. Gotta raise both hands, right? So for anyone who raised their hand to the abolitionist question, what is your avenue of abolition? Anybody can start. I want to know what your avenue of abolition, because some people are like the type of person that goes to the protests. You know, we got Safear who facilitates and organizes. You know what I'm saying? We tell stories and exhibit artwork of people who have been marginalized. So what is your lane of abolition?
Or I'll throw out another one. For the people that didn't raise your hands, what sounds scary about abolition, or what maybe is a sticky point, if you're brave enough to say it, because I bet you we've thought it too.
Hey, I'm Charles. I'm a young wolf, but so my avenue for abolition is education. I'm a professor of Black Studies and English at the Ohio State University. I'm teaching a class right now on global Black cultural movements, and one of the major segments we did was on carceral regimes and domestic warfare. So they read Assata Shakur, they read Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete. You know, we had a conversation about ICE and policing in our classrooms. Also trying to advocate for like Puerto Rican independence, thinking at the intersection of carceral regimes and colonialism. And as you know, trying to do like community study group on abolition.
Oh yeah, plug that.
That's excellent. Yes, there's going to be a community study group on, take it away, Charles.
So March 5th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. at $2 Radio headquarters to sort of co-facilitated community discussion about ICE and policing in the age of the second Trump administration. You can find the link on $2 Radio headquarters event page. It has a link to the short 8-minute reading that we're going to talk about. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for the work.
I don't know why.
More hands down here.
No, I like that.
Just leave it in the pink. Yes.
Sorry. I had just a question because I don't know about this abolition movement. I mean, I've been involved in trying to stop executions, but I don't know about an organization. Just haven't heard about it. I'd like to know if there is way to. Are there organizations or? Has it been going on for a long, long time? I know prisons.
I think it's kind of twofold. Like, yes, the movement to end mass incarceration is as old as mass incarceration, right? Especially if it impacted your family or your community. Well, you should come to the abolition study group that Charles just mentioned. I'm looking forward to that. Obviously, there's us, and you can support our work. The returningartistguild.org, artists with an S, because there's more than one of us. But I think there's the educating yourself piece, and then there's choices around how you want to engage or get involved. And that for me usually depends on like, what are your skills? For instance, we have been working recently with a woman who describes herself as a radical quilter. And she's come along and we've started a quilting group with all formerly incarcerated women, right? So that came about because that was her skill to share, and there was passion there.
I went like, I don't know exactly how many years, 8, 9 years in prison before I ever heard the phrase prison abolition. And that says a lot about prison censorship and what type of educational materials that they let inside of a prison. I would say some scholars of prison abolition, some authors, writers have said that, prison itself is traced back through modern day, through slavery, right? It is the equivalent of modern day slavery. It also is traced back through the indigenous erasure, right? Like indigenous genocide across the, Turtle Island. And it's also traced back through basically like northern capitalist union busting rebellions, right? So really it's to look at the history of prison and say, why was it created? What were the reasons that brought it about? And if you look at it from that angle, then we could say, the abolitionist movement is really old. It's pretty old, quite a few hundred years old. But now today, there's many organizations that are doing this type of work. In the Belly, RAG, and many others.
Yeah, you can seek them out. I think when we decided to do like some network mapping with COSI for our nonprofit, I think I Googled abolitionist groups in Columbus, and there was like a bunch of places that you could, tap into to get familiar. I was just talking to Kirsta about this earlier. I do recommend the book called Let This Radicalize You. It's a book about abolition and starting, how you can get involved, kind of psych yourself up, or, find what, like Aimee said, what it is that you're good at, because it's only, like, you're not gonna be helpful to anyone if you're doing something that you're not good at, So even if what you're good at is just cooking a really good meal, or, being someone's cheerleader or someone's encourager, those are acts of abolition. People are, like everybody in this room is probably an abolitionist of something, I promise you.
I think a resource that I also found interesting is by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and she wrote a book called Golden Gulag. And what I appreciate about her perspective is she steps out really far. Instead of focusing just on prison as buildings or the people who are currently in prisons, she steps back and sees and as history and the economics and all the greater impact on communities when somebody is incarcerated. And the importance of taking that into consideration is how these larger neighborhoods and communities are impacted by one person even being incarcerated. So that was a very good resource that I started with for sure. And there's, Yeah, I mean, I love stories, so I would recommend also Ear Hustle. So I don't know what you guys feel about that, but it comes out of, it's a podcast that comes out of San Quentin, and I feel like they do such a good job at giving platforms to people to talk about their everyday lives while being incarcerated as well as on the outside. And it brings up really good points that I feel like, I don't know, if sitting down and reading a giant book is not your jam, then, you know, podcasts can be a little more accessible.
Yeah, there's also In the Mix, which is in the Billy's podcast.
Yeah, I mean, In the Mix, we started In the Mix while we were incarcerated in the Pennsylvania prison. And essentially what we do now is for any incarcerated person, community builder, artist that wants to create a podcast episode, we make that come to life. We do that for them. So you can check it out, In the Mix Prisoner Podcast.
We also have a podcast called Call Declined. It's a mini series, so it's just 4 episodes with a little bonus episode with our parents getting to throw their 2 cents in. But that's like deep dives our backstory and how we started the RAG and kind of parts of the story that we're over telling.
Yeah, right. You want to get one.
We're very done.
Record it.
We're very done telling all of that. So, anyone else?
Yeah,
I like
what
this
other
audience
questions?
stuff. Yeah, she can come in.
You mentioned that phrase sticking point, you know, what are the sticking points with abolition or the concept of it. And I think one sticking point is that some people start from the premise of thinking that like the system gets it right all the time. Like I work in the court system, so I know that's not true. But I also, one of the artists in your exhibit was wrongfully incarcerated.
Yeah.
So I think that like sometimes there's a value judgment about like, yeah, but they did something wrong or they made a mistake. But sometimes it's like all of us are just, like all of us are vulnerable to being caught up in the system at any given time, you know, by someone's whim. And so I think it's important to recognize like we're not that far away from it.
Yeah, right. I think, so something that was interesting with that is when there's our society is heavily invested in the binary thought frame of good guys versus bad guys, that everyone who's inside is bad and everyone who's outside is good. But the reality is that crime itself, what is criminal, what is illegal, changes all the time.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, there were laws against alcohol and now there's not. And then there's, you know, at times where alcohol was illegal, but illicit drugs were not, you know, and so the fact that what becomes legal or illegal changes all the time, and yet there's no kind of there's no reflection on, okay, so now that this isn't illegal anymore, let's look at all the people who were convicted of that and are currently, you know, and just expunge their records. Like that's not happening. So then it's like, okay, well, it's nebulous. And then on top of that, the idea of, you know, once you mix the binary and the reality is that like everyone is making mistakes, just some people either are caught because of over-policing, or, you know, there's enough laws out there that if somebody wants you to be arrested and charged for something, you can be, you know, then it gets really murky, and then for me, things need to be solidified more in going back to like people. How do we want to treat people? What's better for communities? So yeah, I think challenging the binary of good guys versus bad guys is the first place that I like to start.
And it's super easy to challenge because we continue to build more prisons and continue to have the same crime rate or worse, right? So it's like there's no return on investment with prisons, period.
Yeah, it was like they didn't even try anything else. What happened to the scientific method, right? Like you try one thing, that doesn't work, you try the next thing. Like they try prisons and stop.
Well, it does work.
But
It
for
does
certain
work.
people-
Well,
for
yeah,
some
yeah,
people,
yeah, that, it works
works
for the
very
purpose
well.
that they intended it for, which is also wrong, but.
And also, a thing that leads you to abolition, like one of our favorite questions to ask a prosecutor is, what is the goal of a felony conviction? They never have a fucking answer. Because they don't know what the goal is, or they don't want to say the goal is disenfranchisement, right? Like, they don't want to say that. At the bare minimum, disenfranchisement, right? So, not gonna get on my high horse, but I will say there's so many points of injustice, whether it's how you are arrested, how you are treated in the trial or take a plea bargain situation, how you are treated in an institution, what's the makeup of the institution, what's your charge, who you're around, who you know. There's just a million different ways that the prison itself is actively causing harm, and I would also argue that it harms the people that work there. And like in Ohio, a lot of our prisons are in rural places. Why? Like, why do they need those jobs? I think we can all think through that, right? Like, industry left, what came back? Prisons. So there's like so many threads that you can unravel. In Ohio, 20% of our state taxes goes directly to the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. 20%. That money could be invested in schools, healthcare, neighborhoods, fixing potholes, I don't give a shit. Anything else.
The potholes.
You know, and then for me, as an abolitionist, I've also been victimized. I'm not just a person who has happened to commit crimes, I've been the victim of crimes, and some of them serious. And I recognize that there are people that do cause tremendous harm, but they are a small percentage of who we incarcerate. And I think we can deal with the kinds of people that, for whatever reason, do cause some kind of egregious harm a lot better. And whether you feel they deserve that or not, I think is irrelevant, because who are we to be the arbiters of justice? It's outrageous.
And not to mention that they are still also, they still also have a need that's not being met. Let's just say, like,
Maybe
mental
several.
health.
Right,
You know what I'm
trauma,
saying? Like, let's
addiction.
just use mental health for the example, because like a lot of people do stuff because they're in a mental health crisis.
Right.
But if there's no help for this person, they don't know where to look, they don't know where to go, they don't know how to process, you know, the things that are happening to them. Then what happens? They offend.
Right. If there are systems in place to address things like addiction, mental health, PTSD, trauma, then there would be a lot less need for incarceration.
Yeah, it's a problem we have to solve on the front end. We cannot solve this on the backside. It doesn't work that way. And then also, like, racism, like, very broadly.
Also,
is a
like,
huge part of the problem.
capitalism, like all of the isms, because, you know, the police protect property, not people. It's as simple as that.
Anyone else have anything fun to say?
Yeah,
actually.
That last comment about they protect property, not people, that's not true.
Yes,
That's
yes, it is.
No, they
protect
all.
money.
There's a whole spectrum there. And I can tell you that there's probably a lot more that you're on the outside and you're looking in and you've never been incarcerated. But I see people every day on the street. I drive this city. And there's a lot of people that need help.
A lot.
You know, but there's also those individuals that are out there that aren't getting the help, that are violent. But nobody has talked about a victim other than somebody that's in the prison. What about the victims that are getting attacked
The cops don't
or
help them
anything
either.
else like that?
But the cops, they have to respond, they have to react.
Right.
There's nothing that a
There's
cop can do to
governmental
prevent.
rules that also hold their hands. I saw one girl in campus, a student, get hit from behind, stomped on, had to go to the hospital. Police was there, I was a witness for everything like that. And they were not gonna be able to do anything for him or against him because it was a minor infraction as an assault.
I mean, I think that is the point, right? Is that the police responded after the fact, after harm had been committed. They responded, and they did what? They weren't able to actually bring any like rejuvenation to the situation, any love, any type of reparations, any repair.
Well, no,
they came and they caused more harm, right?
You know,
That's
they
all
took care of
they,
that,
so
but then the other
regardless,
side of that, and
regardless.
governmental laws.
Maybe we can turn the conversation
Yeah,
back to
we have
art.
somebody with the microphone.
Thank
who
you.
needs
Well-
a few moments, thank you, and we'll continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Safear. Sure.
Yeah, no, so just police respond after the fact, after harm has already been committed, and what we've been talking about here this whole time is actually like out, even before police are involved, even before the prisons, how can we actually renegotiate our relationships with each other, rework how we're living in society together to prevent that type of harm from happening in the first place. But what's been happening is instead of doing that, instead of the scientific method, it's now that for every single harm that happens, we use police in prison. Every single harm that happens, we just call police in prison. And obviously that has not been working for us. That has not been making us any safer. So yeah, that's all.
Go ahead, start again. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Well, selfishly, I'm on the Returning Artists Guild board. And so I wanted to hear some stories about the impact of the exhibitions and work that we're able to do on the outside to benefit artists on the outside, but also artists on the inside. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Man, I don't know where to start. You know, some of the artists that we're the closest to are people that we did time with, right? So those relationships and those impacts run pretty deep because they're not only our friends, they're our family, they're our artists. Really what's exciting is like last year we gave out almost $20,000 in art supplies to support the creative practice of these artists and housing funds, and we've supported transportation and babysitting and classes. We partner with OSU to get all of our self-taught artists a little bit more art education.
Formal education.
You know, Kamisha and I do tons of things like this where we speak to people, and I think one of the beautiful things about the art in this particular exhibition is that there's so many different kinds of people represented. We have 3 artists in the show that were wrongfully convicted. One of them is my brother, one of them is Dean, who's here. Of the 16 artists in the show, I think it's 11 that were formerly incarcerated and 5 that are still inside. And diversity across where people live in the state, their age, their race, ethnicity, their political opinions, their everything. Like, we just have a wonderful mix of people, and I think the impact story is like, it's kind of personal. Like, we recently had a prison food party this weekend, and you know, I moved into a new place. We had 22 of our people come through to make some nasty shit in the microwave and do that like in solidarity with our people that are still in there, and also just as a way of like building each other up and remembering that we have each other and that this community exists and that we can work together for a free future. Like, that's the impact that we're trying to have, is like, how do we get to the free future? How do we get past a need for policing and for reactionary stuff, like, period. Like, there has to be a way. And I think that artists are uniquely positioned to create that path because they're visionaries, because they do the work, because they're not afraid to engage and push boundaries and also receive and process information, right? Like, take it in, churn it, process it maybe before you like create the body of work or before you host the exhibition. And so I can say that none of our artists have returned, which is something we're super proud of in terms of like a statistic or something that can go in a grant report. You know, we've been funded by some pretty fancy funders. We got railroad money, y'all. We got Art for Justice, which was Rockefeller, and Mellon, which was like Carnegie Mellon. So I think that alone has been huge for us to come out. Like, we used to spend all of our time sitting on the bench on the yard, like, when we get out of here, we don't do this, we don't do that, but there's always that sense of like, you have no idea what's waiting for you on the other side of that fence, and you absolutely cannot prepare for it. So for us to have like
almost 6 years later, be like, man, we made up our own jobs, we're funded, our work is our passion. Like every day, my job is to just do art stuff with this group of people. It's like an unexplainable joy that I'm trying to settle into now that we're past some of the stress of getting this freaking far. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to call anyone out. We do have 2 of our artists here though, so if they want to make any comments, I'm looking at you, Whitney, and I know you can see me.
Yeah, and I just want to real quick just speak on the impact because we talked to, I talked to a lot of artists who are still inside, and you know, Todd, Dory, DeMarlo, Joy, Terry, you know, we got a long list. And every time we talk to them, or every time I talk to them, they are just so appreciative of the fact that we continue to reach back, we continue to communicate with them. We didn't like forget them and leave them for dead. And you know what I'm saying? It's appreciative. They appreciate it. And that in turn helps make a better prison, right? Because if people are not disgruntled or cantankerous, then you know what I'm saying, everybody's gonna have a good day. You know, for some of us who have experienced incarceration, there was always that one person where you're like, don't piss so-and-so off because they're gonna terrorize the unit or something, you know what I mean? Like, it's just the way it is in a joint. So keeping them encouraged, keeping the lines of communication open, and just being in community with them is a part of the impact that we have. And any one of our artists on the inside will tell you that.
We need to come to a close, but before we do, I just want to say thank you to each one of you for being on our panel and for our discussion. And if there's any final thoughts before we head out, I do want to let the audience know that the building is open until 9 p.m., so please feel free to engage in all the artwork on all 3 levels. So, any final thoughts?
Thanks for being here. Thanks for chatting with us.